By the summer of 1775, the health of the entire Continental Army rested in the hands of a single man. Every fever, every musket wound, every amputation in the camps ringing, Boston fell under the authority of the Army's chief physician, a celebrated doctor named Benjamin Church. Congress had just handed him the most senior medical post in America. Thousands of men trusted him with their lives. He was also the most valuable spy General Thomas Gage had inside the rebellion. Church was no minor informant, no bribed clerk passing scraps. He sat near the very center of the Patriot cause in Massachusetts, inside its councils, its secrets, its war planning, and he had been quietly selling what he saw to the British command. Almost everything his fellow revolutionaries believed about the man was true, except the one thing that mattered. His brilliance was real. His skill with a knife and a fever was real. His patriotism was a performance, and it was the best rehearsed performance of his life. To understand how a man like that went undetected, you have to understand how blind the young American cause was to its own security. In 1775, there was no continental counterintelligence, no vetting, no background checks, nothing that resembled a security service of any kind. The rebellion ran on reputation and trust, on whether the other men in the room knew your name and your record. Britain was the opposite. It had a professional army, a functioning intelligence operation under Gage, and generations of statecraft behind it. The mismatch was total. The Americans were improvising a war. The British had been running spies for a century, and Church's reputation was close to untouchable. He was Harvard-trained, descended from a famous colonial military hero of the same name, and one of the most quoted voices in Boston's resistance. He had delivered a public oration mourning the victims of the Boston Massacre. He sat on the Massachusetts Provincial Congress and its Committee of Safety, shoulder to shoulder with men like Joseph Warren and Samuel Adams. Now, here is the detail that explains everything that follows. The louder and more visible a man's patriotism was, the less anyone thought to question it. Church understood that better than anyone alive. He did not hide in the shadows. He hid at the front of the room. That was his method. And it was almost the exact opposite of what instinct suggests a spy should do. When the Sons of Liberty met, he was there. When the cause needed a stirring speech over its dead, he gave it. Every act of visible loyalty brought him another layer of cover, and he spent that cover carefully. The name most Americans attached to treason in the Revolution is Benedict Arnold. But Arnold's betrayal was still years in the future. Before him, earlier and arguably far better hidden, there was Dr. Benjamin Church. His problem was that the Patriots were not entirely fools. They had begun to sense that their plans kept reaching the enemy before they could act on them. Somewhere in their tight circle of trusted men, secrets were leaking to Gage, and they could not find the source. The pressure of that suspicion should have made Church go quiet. Instead, it made him more careful and more ambitious at the same time. He stopped relying on direct contact with the British and began routing his messages through cutouts, a trusted go-between, a courier who need never know what she carried. He climbed higher into the cause, even as he betrayed it, and in the autumn of 1775, that combination, the confidence of a man who had never been caught and a single message handed to the wrong person, sir, would finally undo him. The war Church had been informing on finally arrived on the 19th of April, 1775. British regulars marched out of Boston with a specific objective. The militias stockpiled arms and gunpowder hidden in the town of Concord. They ran into a countryside that had somehow been warned they were coming. But consider who knew where those stores were kept in the first place. The men who had chosen the hiding places, who tracked the powder and the muskets and the cannon, were the same committee of safety on which Benjamin Church sat. The British commander he secretly answered to needed exactly that kind of knowledge, and Church was one of a small number of people in all of Massachusetts positioned to supply it. Evidence that surfaced only much later would confirm what the Patriots could not yet see, that Gage was being fed reports from deep inside the rebel leadership. Then Church did something that should have exposed him, and instead turned him into a hero. In the tense days after the fighting, he announced that he would walk straight into occupied Boston. The stated reasons were flawless. The wounded needed medicine, and someone brave enough had to see what the British were really doing behind their lines. Joseph Warren was appalled. Walking into Boston now, he warned Church, was a fine way to get himself hanged as a rebel. It was exactly the sort of warning a guilty man should have seized on as his excuse to stay home. Church waved it away and went. What he told his friends when he came back was a story of danger and defiance. That British soldiers had seized him, that he had been hauled before Gage himself and interrogated, and that he had held his nerve and given up nothing. It was a perfect tale. The loyal patriot who stared down the enemy commander and walked home unbroken. And it worked exactly as intended. His standing only rose. But not every detail sat right, and the detail that sat worst was the money. A Boston man later swore he had seen Church in the occupied town, not as a prisoner marched under guard, but moving freely, and at one point sitting in private conversation with Gage. Not the frightened captive of the story, something closer to a guest, and Church, by some accounts, came home from that errand with more coin in his pocket than a man on a mercy mission had any business carrying. That money points at the question every traitor eventually forces you to ask, why? With Church, the answer that has held up best over 2 centuries is not some wounded loyalty to the crown or a secret change of heart. It was simpler and more human than that. Church lived far above what a doctor's income could carry. He kept an expensive country house, a costly private life, and habits that ran his debts higher than his patients could ever pay down. A man like that has a price, and Gage had a paymaster. Even now, the full shape of his motives is uncertain, and Church never explained himself honestly. But the ledger tells a plainer story than the ideology ever could. He did not betray the cause because he stopped believing in it. He betrayed it because he needed the money and the enemy paid. Paul Revere, writing years afterward, would still remember the unease that hung over the whole Boston affair, the nagging sense that something in Church's account had never fully added up. But unease is not evidence. In 1775, there was no one whose job it was to chase a suspicion down. No file to open, no investigator to assign, no one to set one man's story beside another's. A doubt with nowhere to go simply dissolves. And so the first real test of Church's method did not merely survive. It paid a dividend in trust, in access, and quite literally in cash. He had proven he could operate in full view of both sides at once and be thanked for it. Within weeks, the cause would hand his apparent courage the highest medical office in the army. The louder the patriot, the safer the spy. Church had just put his own theory through the hardest test it would ever face, and it had held. In July of 1775, the cause did the one thing that would make Church's betrayal complete. It promoted him. The Continental Congress named him Director General and Chief Physician of the Army's hospitals, the first man ever to hold what amounted to the office of Surgeon General of the Continental Army. Think about what that meant. The doctor who had been quietly selling secrets to the enemy now sat at the very summit of the Army's medical command, with a reason to be anywhere, to speak to anyone, to know almost everything. His method had carried him from a committee room in Boston all the way to the inner circle of a national army. There was nowhere higher for a spy to climb. And this is the part of the story that no planner on either side could have scripted. The thing that would finally bring Benjamin Church down was already in motion. And it was not a counter-spy, not an investigator, not some brilliant stroke of American intelligence. It was a folded letter written in code, and the wrong person to carry it. Church, now operating at the highest stakes of his life, wrote out a message for the British in cipher, a page of numbers and symbols, meaningless to anyone without the key. It was tradecraft, the mark of a man who thought he had planned for everything. And to move it, he fell back on the method that had never failed him. Never touch the enemy directly, always work through a cutout who could be sacrificed if the chain broke. He handed the letter to the person closest to him, a woman he trusted completely, and told her to carry it to Newport, Rhode Island, and get it into British hands. He had encrypted the words. He had used a go-between. By his own logic, he was safe. He had made one mistake, and it had nothing to do with cryptography. He had trusted the wrong people to love him. The woman carried the letter to Newport as instructed, but instead of delivering it to a British agent, she brought it to a man she happened to know, Godfrey Wenwood, a baker and a former lover, and asked him to help pass it along to the enemy. Wenwood was a patriot at heart, and the request unsettled him. A neighbor handing him a coded message, meant for the British was not something a loyal man could simply forward and forget. So he did the most dangerous thing a courier chain can encounter: nothing. He kept the letter, he said he would see to it, and then he quietly held on to it and consulted a trusted friend and let it sit. Weeks passed. The message that was supposed to reach Boston within days went nowhere at all. Then the woman made the chain's second fatal error. Alarmed that nothing seemed to have happened, she wrote to Wenwood pressing him. Why had the letter never been delivered? That letter frightened him far more than the first. Now he was not just holding a coded message for the enemy, he was being pressed to complete the delivery. He decided he wanted no part of the risk, and he turned it over to the authorities. From there, the letter began to climb. It passed up the chain until it reached General Nathaniel Greene, and Greene carried it straight to George Washington at his headquarters in Cambridge. It was late September of 1775. Washington unfolded a page he could not read. Rows of numbers and symbols, deliberate and dense, plainly meant to keep their secret from exactly the man now holding them. The cipher itself was a simple substitution. Every letter traded for a number or a symbol, the kind of code that looks impenetrable until someone patient starts guessing at the short common words that repeat in any letter. An and, a the, a name that appears twice. Once the first few gave way, the rest of the page fell open. He did not have a code-breaking bureau. No such thing existed in his army. So he did what the moment allowed. He handed the cipher to clever men and asked them to break it. One of them was the Reverend Samuel West, a country minister with a gift for puzzles, who sat down and worked the thing letter by letter until the symbols resolved into English. Independently, a sharp Massachusetts politician named Elbridge Gerry attacked the same page and solved it too. When their answers were laid side by side, they matched, and what they had uncovered was unmistakable. A detailed report on the strength and condition of the American forces, written for delivery to the British command. Now, Washington had a decrypted letter of treason and no name attached to it. So he sent for the one person who could give him one, the woman who had carried it. She was brought before the commander-in-chief and questioned, and at first she held her ground and refused to name the man who had trusted her. But she was a private citizen standing in front of General Washington himself, accused of carrying secrets to the enemy in wartime, and the pressure did not let up. In the end, she gave him the name. It was Dr. Benjamin Church, the first Surgeon General of the Continental Army, the celebrated Patriot, the man Congress had just elevated above every other physician in America. Sit with how that unraveled for a moment, because if you wrote it into a novel, an editor would send it back as too far-fetched. The most senior doctor in the Army, a man who had survived years of suspicion by hiding in plain sight, brought down not by a master spy hunter, but by a jilted baker in Newport who simply refused to pass a letter along. A professional cipher, built to be unbreakable, undone at a parson's kitchen table, the whole apparatus of Church's caution, the code, the cutout, the layered deniability, defeated by the two things no tradecraft can plan around: an ordinary man's conscience and a private tangle of old loyalties. Church had guarded against every threat he could imagine. He had never imagined these. Strip away the cipher and the courier and the years of careful cover, and what Benjamin Church did can be said very plainly. He turned trust into a weapon and aimed it at the men who had handed it to him. He hid his treason not in the dark, where a spy is supposed to live, but inside a patriot speech, where no one thought to look. He did not run from suspicion when it circled him. He climbed above it, office by office, until he stood too high in the cause to be doubted. He made his own loyalty so loud that no one could hear the betrayal underneath it. That was the whole method. It was not brilliant tradecraft that kept him safe for so long. It was the simple human refusal of good people to believe that one of their most celebrated own could be exactly what he was. And then it all came due at once. Church was arrested and hauled before a council of war in the autumn of 1775, and here the young republic ran into a problem it had never imagined. It had caught a traitor at the top of its army, and it had almost no law with which to punish him. The rules of war the Americans were fighting under had no real answer for a senior officer selling secrets to the enemy. The court found him guilty of criminal correspondence with the British, but the machinery to hang him for it simply did not yet exist. His own defense only deepened the disgust in the room, and he insisted the letter had been a trick, that he had deliberately exaggerated American strength to frighten the British into backing down, that he had been serving the cause all along. Almost no one believed him, so they did what they could. Congress ordered him locked locked away in a Connecticut jail in close confinement, denied pen and paper, and denied visitors except under watch. His health, never robust, began to fail in the cold and the isolation. Over the following years, the fight went out of him. Eventually, a broken and diminished man, he was permitted to leave the country altogether and sail for the West Indies. The ship carried him out of the harbor and into the open Atlantic, and it was never seen again. Somewhere out on that water, in 1778, Benjamin Church vanished from the record entirely. No grave, no deathbed, no last confession. The most highly placed traitor of the early revolution simply disappeared beneath the sea. For a century and a half, that was where the story ended, with a suspicion never fully proven. Then, generations later, General Gage's own private papers were opened to historians, and inside them was the rest of the truth. Church had not been a one-time correspondent, tempted into a single foolish letter. He had been reporting to the British from deep inside the Patriot leadership long before the message that caught him, exactly as his accusers had feared and could never prove. The gap in the law that had spared his neck did not stay open long either. Within a year, the country had made espionage a hanging offense, the very kind of law under which later spies on both sides would go to the gallows. And yet ask most Americans to name a traitor of the revolution, and they will say Benedict Arnold. Church came first, betrayed more quietly, and was caught before he could do his worst, and so history handed his infamy to the louder man and let his own name fade into a footnote. He spent his whole career hiding in plain sight. In the end, that is exactly where he was forgotten. If you made it this far and had never heard of the first American traitor before today, do the small thing that helps this channel keep telling the stories the famous names crowd out. Subscribe and tap the like button so the next person finds it too. And then tell me in the comments, do you think Church actually believed his own excuse, that the letter was a bluff to scare the British off, or was that simply the last lie of a man who had finally run out of them?